Today, we're going to be talking about your champion pool. If you want to climb in solo queue, your champ pool must make sense. But you've probably heard a bunch of challenger players tell you to just shut up and one trick. But I'm not going to do that, because one tricking is just so boring for so many players. Therefore, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the top 3 essentials to keep in mind for building the optimal champ pool, on top of the massive trap cards you must avoid that I guarantee you've fallen into before. The first step when building the optimal champ pool is just to cut out the fat. You need to keep within your identity as a player. The reality is you're not going to be good at multiple classes of champions. A Jax one trick is almost never going to be amazing at Kennen. Although you may see streamers or pro players who can play multiple styles, but are you one of them? Are you putting in 14 hours a day every day in Challenger? Low chance. My viewers are going on way too many dates to play that much League of Legends. Therefore, you must commit to one playstyle. For example, a great Fiora player would be able to learn Jax much easier than a Kennen player would. On the other hand, that very same Kennen player would be able to learn Jace or Rumble because they already have such a strong foundation of being a range top player. Therefore, you need to make sure that you think about your strengths as a player. What do you enjoy? What are you good at? And build your champ pool around that. The problem is most players try to have a jack of all trades approach to their champion pool, trying to get the perfect pick that'll carry every single game, because they just can't stand the games where their champion doesn't feel useful. But the better approach is always to have a pool that's optimal for you, not what's optimal for every game that you play. But let's take a look at some real examples. As you can see, this player, he has so much success when he just commits to his strong split pushing identity. However, he really struggles on Cassante and Abyssa, because they're just so different to what he's good at. Even though they're broken meta champions, they're not what got him to 2k LP. They don't highlight his strengths as a player. But let's take a look at another player. As you can see, the top 4 most played champions in his pool are all ranged top laners, which means the skills that he develops and improves on for his Gnar would also apply to the rest of the champions in his pool. It's a very efficient way to learn the game while still being able to play multiple champions. To really help understand this concept, try to compare it to an out-of-game skill. If you're a very good tennis player, it's very likely you could pick up racquetball so much easier than rugby, because you've got a ton of reps on a sport that has some transferable skills. But for some reason, when it comes to League of Legends, people think they can play every sport or class of champion completely equally. But let's even mix it up with a jungle example. As you can see from this player, anytime Rengar is banned away, they just lock in a champion with the most similar identity possible, such as Talon or Kha'Zix. Therefore, I guarantee if you hone in on your identity as a player, no matter what it is, you'll have so much more success during your climb compared to trying to have the perfect champion that can 1v9 for every single draft that you come across. Moving on to tip number 2. Now, no matter what your champion pool is, the most important thing by far is you need a main blind. No matter what rank you are or what champions you play, you will be counterpicked. This is reality. So you need a champion that you're confident to play in these bad matchups. It's such a big part of the game that you cannot escape. Now, you don't need to one trick, but you do need to play the majority of your blind pick games on this champion. However, if you truly don't know what to blind, I recently made a blind pick tier list that you can use as a reference. But make sure your priority is your player identity and your strengths overall, not just whatever champion you find in S tier. Now, at this point, it may seem pretty straightforward. Lock in your main blind and build your champ pool around that with similar champions. But there are definitely problems with doing this blindly. Even though you do want champions with a similar identity, you really don't want them to all do the same thing. You want them to have different strengths, so that you can pick them in different situations, or else you might as well just one trick. A great example being there is almost no point playing both Darius and Gwen in the same pool. They are both great against the exact same comps with a very similar matchup spread. So why would you ever pick Gwen over Darius if you're already better at him? But if we are to compare this to a pool with Darius plus Olaf, it makes a lot more sense. A lot of the skills you're building on Darius will apply to Olaf. However, Olaf is better in certain situations, such as playing against hard CC comps or some brutal range top matchups such as Jace and Gnar that Darius really hates. So building your pool this way, you still gain the benefits of transferable skills, which is the most important thing, but you also gain a champion that gives you options to completely 1v9 or win your lane in matchups that Darius would really struggle in. So just make sure when building a champ pool around your main, the additional champions aren't too similar. However, I will admit admit, it does require pretty good knowledge to know which champions are too similar to begin with. So let's actually practice and build a champion pool together. Let's say, for example, that your main blind is Ambessa, and we're wanting to add 2 extra champions to that champ pool. Which do you think would be the 2 best options out of these 4? Aatrox, Renekton, Zahin, and Darius. Make sure to really think about which champions are too similar, or which champions can fill holes that Ambessa may have. I'll give you 10 seconds to lock in your answer. Make sure you don't cheat. Time's up, everyone. The correct answer, the most optimal choices, would be Renekton and Zahin. The reason being is, for the others, Aatrox is just way too similar to Ambessa. They are both extremely stable blind picks who do very similar jobs in game. In fact, Ambessa is basically just Aatrox after the balance team added their 500 years of experience to him. So why would you want to play both? Now, with Darius, he just plays way too different to Ambessa. He doesn't really suit the identity of an Ambessa player. You'd be basically learning a brand new skill set from scratch. On the other hand, with Renekton, not only is he great into Ambessa if they happen to take her, but he's also good in a lot of matchups that Ambessa really hates, such as Ambessa, Tryndamere, Camille, etc., while still maintaining that same identity. Same with Zahin, very similar identity, but you can pick him into free lanes or dive comps, making him a very high impact champion in the right spots. So as you can see with our final pool, we're still keeping a similar champion identity. Champions with a short trade playstyle, clear 1 to 2 item spikes, who win games primarily through skirmishing and teamfighting. But we still gain the benefit of having options alongside our Ambessa that'll be more impactful in certain situations, on top of having a bit more variety and fun for our client. Therefore, if you want to build your own personal champion pool, first of all start by locking in your main blind. Then build champions around them that not only have a similar identity, but also different strengths than your main. Do not add a champion just for fun or for vibes. Ideally, they should thrive in situations that your main champ would struggle in. Now, our third essential tip is related to counterpicking. However, ideally, you would just use your additional champions as your counters. So with our previous example, that would be Renekton and Zahin. But it can be impactful to have some other tricks up your sleeve, what I like to call ease of execution counterpicks. These are essentially champions that require very little mastery to play. However, you must only pick them in the perfect spots, but there are some exceptions. So I'll show a mini tier list of exactly what I mean. As you can see here, the champions at the top of the list are very easy to execute. You could put relatively low effort in and be able to have them as high impact counterpicks in your pool as long as you only use them as such. Now for the champions in the middle, these are ones that require quite a lot of mastery to be used as blind picks, but not really to be used as counterpicks. Although to be honest, it's not really worth learning them just for that. It's only if you have past experience on them. So for me personally, I've learned Darius in the past, but my Darius mastery isn't high enough to blind pick him every game in Korean solo queue. However, I'd have no trouble picking him as a counter into champions like Sion or Irelia, as these are relatively easy matchups for me. Now, the bottom row is just examples of champions where in theory, they would make very good counter picks, but in reality, it's not worth it. They require way too much champ mastery to be used even as counters, to the point where you might as well just use that time on your main champs. Therefore, the main thing to keep in mind here, if you want to add counter picks to your pool, you must make sure they're either extremely easy to execute or champs that you already have a bunch of past experience on. Do not learn advanced counter pick champions from scratch, it's just not worth it. Trap cards to avoid. Now this is where my years of coaching experience will save you a ton of trouble. First of all, no, you do not need an AP champion in your pool. However, you do need an AD one. The reason being, too much AP makes most AP champions on your team completely useless. For example, Nidalee Jungle or Syndra Mid, if they verse MR stackers, they will be useless, I guarantee you. But with too much AD, it's actually still playable. Personally, I barely pick AP champions this season. AD champions just don't eat as much shit when itemized against. However, if you do have an AP champion with a similar identity to your main, that's of course going to be great. Just don't force one in for no reason. Another trap people fall into is way too many complex champions in their pool. There is a reason why it's pretty rare that you see people play Fiora and Riven or Irelia with Jace in the same champ pool. Even though these champions are all very fun, and a lot of them may even have a similar identity, you're not realistically gonna build high enough mastery on multiple of them if you have a life outside of the game. No offense to myself or other challenger players, but it's just true. Almost every single champion pool out there should have between 0 and 1 complex champions in it. The exception being is if you're a multi-season challenger player. If you don't know which champions are complicated, you can refer to my tier list right here, and make sure you avoid playing more than one champion that requires 300 games or more. The final trap card is the classic, but it's a classic for a reason. Do not play too many champions. But to make it easy for you, on the screen right now, I'll put a recommended amount for each rank. So you can see here below Platinum, 1 to 2 champions. For Emerald to Diamond, 3 as a maximum, and Masters Plus, you can go up to 4. This may seem a little bit restrictive, but don't panic. These numbers don't include the easy to execute counter picks that we talked about earlier. So just make sure when you're building your personal champion pool, you avoid these trap cards whilst also sticking to the 3 essential rules we talked about in this video. If you can do so, I guarantee you'll have an amazing champ pool ready for your climb. Alright team, that's it for today. I'm hoping you gained some value alongside a better understanding of how to build your pool. But if you still need some help building your champ pool, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to help you down there, and hopefully see you for the next video.